Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this Good Ideas webinar focused on the pandemic's impact on education around the world. We're proud to present today's discussion in partnership with Teach for America Houston. For those joining from Houston, we're especially grateful that you are able to participate this morning. It's been such an incredibly difficult week, and we've been keeping all of you, especially our Houston students and educators, in our thoughts as we look toward navigating the new additional challenges created by these recent events. My name is Cary Wright, and I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer here at Good Reason Houston. Our organization exists to accelerate public school improvement, and we believe that every child in every neighborhood of Houston deserves access to a world-class public school. With this mission in mind, we're diving in deeper today to talk about how countries all around the globe are responding to the pandemic and what insights we might be able to take away right here at home. Joining us this morning is Wendy Kopp, founder of Teach for America, and now co-founder and CEO of Teach for All, which is a global network of independent organizations cultivating their nation's most promising future leaders to ensure that their most marginalized children have the chance to fulfill their true potential. Today, the Teach for All network is comprised of partner organizations in 59 countries on 6 continents. Now, we all know that decreased learning time has negative long-term consequences for students. And so mitigating learning loss for this generation here in Houston, in our country, and around the world is going to be of urgent importance as we face the months and years ahead. Wendy is here to discuss with us these challenges and opportunities that the pandemic has presented to education around the world. And as our conversation gets underway, we invite you to submit your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll address as many as time allows. So without further ado, welcome and thank you for joining us today, Wendy.
Thanks so much for having me, Cary. And my heart just goes out to everyone there in Houston and all across your state. I'm impressed that anyone showed up today. It's amazing. So look forward to the discussion.
Well, yeah, let's just jump in. We want to be really mindful of folks' time. So let's start by just kind of learning a little bit more about you. You've been involved in education for many decades, starting with founding Teach for America almost 30 years ago. And you've seen the effects of learning loss from various historical events during that time. So I'm curious, what are you learning now about the global impacts of the pandemic and its near and long-term implications for children around the globe?
Yes, well, it's very worrisome, of course. I mean, I know you're seeing this in your own work in Houston, but, around the world, I mean, first of all, 1.5 billion kids have been out of school at one point during this pandemic, which is almost all of the world's children, but half of them have been out of school for at least 7 months. And at least half of them have not had any access to ongoing or remote learning during that time. And as we know, even the kids who have had access, it can be pretty spotty, especially for the most disadvantaged kids in the world. So, I mean, what you know is that the world's most vulnerable kids and the most marginalized kids weren't on a path to thriving on average. And I think that's both, I mean, we need to remember that, we already needed to reinvent a new system for the most marginalized kids. And now it's even, this situation has only compounded that. To give you a sense, in low and middle income countries around the world, 53% of 10-year-olds are not reading or out of school. That's called the learning poverty rate in a global kind of education, terminology. And they're projecting that that's going to go to 63%. And even in more developed countries like our own, we're projecting that the most disadvantaged kids are going to lose maybe, over a year of learning. So, and I must tell you, like, even in the last couple of days, I've been on these calls with teachers across our network and alumni educators, and I've come off of those meetings with a still heavier heart, just as I've heard firsthand they're speaking to not only how much learning loss and how much kind of the well-being and mental health of their students has taken a toll, but also how many kids we've lost who they think will never come back to schools, who are already, had to go to work, have been married early. So clearly we have I think we don't need to give up hope. I do think there are reasons for optimism, but we need to be very centered in just how significant the challenges to young people growing up today all around the world really are.
And so Teach for All covers or has partners that are in 59 countries, including the US. And I'm kind of curious from that vantage point and speaking about the stakes that you just described, what are you seeing in terms of ways in which countries are taking steps to keep their kids learning right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen just heroic efforts to use any and all means to keep kids safe and to keep them learning. I guess the biggest thing that comes to mind is that, what we've seen is that whenever kids have kept learning, it's always been about teachers or some other, school leaders or parents in their lives who have just exerted a tremendous amount of. That's something that, I think about a lot because we kind of all wish it were easier. Like wherever there was access to technology, kids kept learning, but it's not what we've seen. So I think about like rural Uganda, where Teach for Uganda is placing its teaching fellows in communities with no electricity. Okay. I mean, not only no phones, but no electricity. And these fellows figured out how to keep 8,000 kids across their 33 school communities learning during this time. They created a schedule where the kids are showing up in learning pods under trees and the teachers are rotating from community to community. And actually, we'll get to this, but their observation is that their kids may just well be learning a lot more now because they used to be in 70 to 100 kid classrooms. And now there's much more possibility for kind of individualized instruction and all. So we've seen everything from that to many, many, communities around the world where the way to keep kids learning was through, radio and TV. And I've been amazed to see our network teachers and alumni become the voices. I mean, we now have a whole community of practice among alumni and teachers across our network, just sharing solutions about how to do radio well. And how to understand whether kids are learning, which I never would have predicted. And then we have other environments where there is much more connectivity and access. We've also seen, think about the Teach First alums in the UK, 60 of them who mobilized within a month, literally put the entire British curriculum online in video, high quality video lessons, 10,000 lessons. I just heard they've had 120 million lessons viewed since last March till now. And they think they'll never lose this, that, now for every grade level and subject area, every class period, there are high quality videos with the lessons, all the related materials. And they're thinking this could be a real avenue to improve instruction going forth. It could free up the teachers to say, go watch the lesson and then we'll talk about it, and help the teachers change their role. So we've seen a lot, but always at the heart of it, we've seen that it's about people and leadership making it happen.
Huh. So interesting to hear, like, I think especially this idea of moving into the radio and TV and this idea of sort of expanding access to really rigorous content across an entire country. And I'm curious kind of what other examples of innovation have you been seeing in this moment that are really giving you kind of hope and optimism and maybe that have sort of really piqued your curiosity and interest about things, to your point, we could be doing well beyond this moment?
Yeah. Well, we've actually, about a couple months ago, we launched a campaign around innovations to keep, just trying to really surface, like, now that we've stepped out of the box of education, like, what are we seeing that could hold the key, as you say, to a reimagined system? And I think we'll keep learning, but a few of the things that have emerged. And so first of all, there's all of the technology enabled innovations. And I think what we've seen on that front, from the video bank of high quality lessons in the UK to something very similar in India, that was launched by an organization started by a Teach for India alumnus, which has basically done the same thing for the Indian curriculum, but made it accessible in low bandwidth environments on phones. To even in Zimbabwe, I mean, where there's much less connectivity and devices. I mean, they've actually put segments of the curriculum on MP3 players, and they're so excited about how that could actually improve access ongoing, because in their villages, when it's a rainy season, so many kids don't come, and girls don't come to school for a week every month still. And so we're seeing that whole category of just the ways in which using available technology has made teaching and learning kind of easier and more accessible. We've also seen, I think this era just got educators over the inertia of leveraging technology. And I think where we've done it well, we've seen that it really does have the potential to kind of shift the role of the teacher and student in a really optimal way, like where you kind of put the students more in charge of their own learning and enable more differentiation and enable the teacher to become more a facilitator of learning. Like I think about a teacher in Pakistan who created a WhatsApp school where, she's just basically got a fully functional, school going on with her 100 girls, where every day she's WhatsApps out an instructional video and assignments, and they send them back. And she's just saying, wow, we'll never, I can't wait to come back with the 100 girls, but we'll never lose the WhatsApp school, because it's just led to a totally different level of differentiation. And also there's the technology bucket. There's just, there's all of the ways in which we've enlisted many others to a greater degree in making education work, like parents. And we've seen, the degree to which the relationship with parents has deepened, and we've learned how to support parents to keep their kids learning. I think there's some real keys there that, not that we want parents to be, stepping in for teachers for the rest of eternity, but there are ways in which we've deepened the relationships that could really stand us well. In some countries, there are huge tutoring programs, and there's much talk in, say, Australia and again in the UK of saying we may never lose the tutoring programs. Like, we're going to have kids far behind, but we already had kids far behind, and it's amazing what one-on-one attention can do. And then the final thing I'll just say is, I think there's just been so much more attention on student well-being and social emotional skills and mental health, in a way that, there was much discussion of that, but it was always kind of a kind of side event. And I think we're seeing so much evidence about the fact that it's actually those skills. When your kids have those skills, they've kept learning, because they have a growth mindset. They own their education. They know how to manage, their emotions. We saw a study in Mexico that Enseña por Mexico did, which showed that the kids who had built stronger socio-emotional skills had strong mental health during this era. So I just think we'll go to a whole new level, hopefully, if we do things right when we come back, in terms of the degree to which we're focusing on those dimensions.
Well, it's so energizing to hear you share all these examples. I know for me, they give me such optimism about what's ahead in spite of all these challenges. And I know on today's call, we have an audience that has educators, parents, community leaders, nonprofit organizations, folks that are just so deep in this work right now. And sometimes it feels so difficult to kind of rise above all the challenges that we're facing hour by hour, day by day. And so I'm just kind of curious to have you go a little bit deeper on that subject of what's really giving you optimism in this moment. What's the hope that you're carrying that we might all take away and sort of carry into our work right after this call even?
I will say, I really hear and relate to what you just shared, because I think it's my biggest fear. And I think it's a risk we all run. There are so many challenges, probably everyone on this, that we're all facing huge challenges, and the most disadvantaged folks are facing them to an even greater degree. And there's probably every temptation and every likelihood that we'll kind of try as quickly as possible to go back to normal. And what I'm just really trying to center myself in is, the question of what can we do so that we don't do that? Because normal wasn't getting us where we needed to be, and it definitely will not get us where we need to be now, given that we're up against even more in terms of what's facing kids and families. So I think we just have to really sort of force ourselves to step back and create the space to rethink and to focus on what the new possibilities are. And I think, and again, I know how this can seem very not in sync with like whole communities that are enduring what the Houston community just endured, but I think we need to try to find the space to step back, even on the question, I would say first and foremost on the question of what are we working towards? I think it starts there. If we can bring students and families and educators and other community leaders together around the question of what do we want for our community? What do we want for our country? And therefore, what do we need to be working towards in our schools? I think that's where it all starts. And it's also such a unifying question. And I think it's a question that we, especially at this point in our nation's history, irrespective of, all the natural disasters that we've all been enduring, but just the incredible polarization in our country and all the evidence of, systemic oppression on numerous levels. I just think this is a moment where we can come together and say, here's what we want. And remember that what we have in classrooms today is what we'll have in the future. So if we don't really go back to that question, to me, that's the starting point. And then we can start asking, okay, so how do we get there? And I think then we'll move much more quickly because we'll have a shared sense of aspiration.
Yeah, you're making me think about it. A challenge that's very top of mind for all of us working on this issue in the United States, which is obviously this idea of equity. And even before the pandemic, right here in Houston, some 265,000 of our students are going to schools rated C, D, or F by the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And the data says that if you identify as a Black student, you're more than 4 times more likely to attend a school rated D or F than your white peers. And we know too that because of the pandemic, like these issues of learning loss are going to influence those communities, kids of color, kids facing the circumstances of poverty even more severely. And I'm kind of curious what other countries, what's the conversation look like from an equity perspective in other places that you're seeing, and kind of what might we take away here in the US because of that?
I'm not going to be able to give you much inspiration there because the fact is it's the same the world over. This pandemic I can't say that it changed things in a way, like it exposed the inequities that were already there. It did exacerbate them. We're having the same conversation all across the network. It's certainly not unique to the US. I think, where my head goes in all of this is just, it goes to the question of, do we have enough leadership focused on this question? In all honesty, like that's what this is going to come back to and down to, like the communities and the countries that decide and kind of recognize that our young people are at risk and that decide we're going to develop and unleash a whole lot of leadership against that question in the form of teachers and school leaders and many others. Those are the communities that will do best. There's just no substitute for this. We're not going to be able to rain down solutions that fix this. The tech companies, it's true. We need, I think there will be much more energy on closing the digital divide, and that's all very important, but it actually won't help us if we don't have enough local people deeply rooted in communities who understand whatever that available technology is, as well as have the relationships, the trust and such to be able to actually make the most of it. And so it just really brings me back to the work we're all engaged in, the work that Teach for America and many others in the US and many others around the world are engaged in, to say, how do we cultivate collective leadership around our kids. I mean, that's ultimately what this is going to come down to.
Going a little bit more onto that subject, and again, just kind of speaking to this incredible audience that we have with us today, folks who even amidst all of the chaos of last week have prioritized this conversation and this work around how do we provide all kids a better education. I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on, obviously that's not just the role of the educator, right? But it's about the work of other folks in the community, seeking to help schools and help school system address the challenges of the pandemic. So kind of what are you seeing, or what advice do you have for us in terms of the larger role of the community in supporting the path ahead?
I do think, I mean, as I was sharing earlier, I mean, I think the first step is for us to come together in communities, students and parents and educators and others, to ask ourselves, what are we working towards? Somehow it's very interesting because I think there's a very high level of consciousness that our country is at a crossroads, that there are massive challenges facing us, but somehow we have kind of not put education at the center of the solution in a way that's, I think we have to address, you know, like it really is kind of a truism that what we're fostering in classrooms today is what we'll have in 10 or 15 years in our country. And I think we need to go back to fundamentals. I actually, I don't know if you saw this, Cary, but I'll send it your way after this. I wrote an op-ed in Ed Week, which I mean, probably I haven't done in 20 years or something, but just saying that, you know, this is the time, you know, as we open a new chapter in this country with a new presidential administration and whatnot, and a new Secretary of Education, to really step back on the most fundamental of all questions, which is, what is the purpose of education? You know, what are we working towards in our schools? And I think we have to do that before we then realize what all else we need to put at this. So that's the first thing I would say to everyone in communities is, let's truly go back to first principles. That's probably my biggest thought.
And what if we can also go a little bit deeper onto just the idea of the incredible role that teachers are playing amidst all this? I mean, they are now frontline workers, really, you know, in such a seat of responsibility and leadership of these issues. And I'm kind of curious, what advice would you give to teachers who are navigating these challenges? What encouragement would you offer to them?
You know, I would say, first of all, take care of yourselves. Truly, I mean, that would be the first thing. Like, I think we need our teachers to take care of their own well-being so that they can be there for students. And this is clearly such a stressful time. The other thing I would say is, I mean, I've seen evidence in my own kids' lives, and I've seen it all across the network of Teach for All. I think we've really unleashed the leadership of teachers and educators in a new way. I mean, there was no playbook for this, and I hope we keep doing that because, you know, I've just seen incredible acts of heroism from teachers in my own kids' public schools, in, you know, et cetera, you know, all across. And so I think we just need to see that continue. And the other thing I would say, Cary, as long as I have the chance, is that I just can't imagine, like, if you're a graduating senior out there, what could be more important and what could be more challenging than channeling your energy towards education? Like, I think truly, never has it been so clear that this is the key to the future, that any of our aspirations will rest on what we do in our schools. And we just need, as I said before, extraordinary leadership. And I hope that Teach for America and others are kind of leaning into that challenge of saying, you know, truly one of the most important things we can do right now is mobilize the rising generation of promising leaders coming out of colleges, young professionals all across the country, to channel their energy into this arena. I mean, truly, the degree to which we succeed in that is going to have so much to do with whether we come out of this with this generation thriving.
Well, we're kind of nearing the end of our time here, Wendy. So I want to just make space for any other final thoughts that you might have for us, or any other sort of calls to action for those of us working on this issue right here in the United States or in Texas.
My biggest thought is just, I'm so impressed that given all the circumstances down there, you've got 67 people who prioritized coming onto this call. And I know that there are many others who would have if they could. And it just says so much about where Houstonians are putting their priorities. And I think that's the most important sign. Like, I think, there's so many challenges, and I think helping people understand that we have not only an economic crisis and a health crisis, but an education crisis and an education opportunity, and just really need right now to center that, because so just to say, like, again, my heart goes out to you, and I can't wait to see what you do in this coming era, because and I hope we can learn from it, across our global network as well.
Well, we thank you so much for the time and the thoughts today. And for those of you who joined us, that's all the time we had for this morning. Bold and brief. But we want to again thank Wendy for sharing her perspective on global education during the pandemic. And we'd also like to thank Teach for America Houston for co-hosting today's really important conversation. I know I've learned so much and I've had my perspective expanded. So have really appreciated the opportunity to be in community with one another, albeit virtual. And thank you all for making time to be with us as well. We invite you to please share this recording with any of your friends and family who couldn't join us. A link will be emailed to you after today's conversation. And we also want to put out a blurb for some of our upcoming webinars. So we hope to see you next Tuesday, March 3rd at 1:30 p.m. for our rescheduled Good Ideas webinar with Superintendent Jennifer Blaine from Spring Branch ISD and early learning experts from Aldine, Alief, and Houston ISD as we discuss the potential pre-K crisis that's facing Houston. You can visit our website at goodreasonhouston.org/events to register and learn more about other Good Ideas events, such as an upcoming conversation on March 9th with former Secretary of Education and now CEO of Texas 2036, Margaret Spellings. So we thank you all again for joining us. We hope to see you all again on another Good Ideas webinar soon. And with that, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Cary.